Trans panic!
Hey, Joslyn.
Hey, Lyman.
Why are so many people confused about gender these days? Is it something in the water? Is it the rise of social media and widespread increase in LGBTQ plus content across the globe?
The truth is, there have been queer people and people expressing across the gender spectrum for most of recorded human history. If you look for them, you'll find pockets of LGBTQ plus individuals coming together and creating chosen families in the most surprising places. One of those places is in the period just before the Nazis rose to power in Germany, a period known as the Weimar Republic.
The Weimar Republic describes the period in German history after World War I and before World War II. After World War I, the Versailles Treaty left Germany in a sorry state, with major reparations to pay. Hyperinflation and political instability became a fact of daily life.
However, by the 1920s, the economy was growing again and civil unrest was at an all-time low. Across the Western world, the Roaring Twenties had arrived.
Enter jazz, cabaret, Bauhaus, the ultramodern woman, Cubism, and what we might today call queerness.
Around the same time, an Ashkenazi Jewish physician named Magnus Hirschfeld would become a major figure in the queer renaissance of the 1920s, revolutionizing our ideas about sex and gender.
After his studies, he spent time in Chicago, where he observed there were many commonalities between the gay communities in Germany and in the US.
By 1896, he ran a naturopathic practice in Berlin and noticed that many of his gay patients had self-afflicted scars, and an unfortunate number were taking their own lives.
One of his patients, a young army officer he had been treating for depression, wrote in his suicide note that the shame nearly strangled his heart. In his note to Magnus, he wrote, "The thought that you could contribute to a future when the German fatherland will think of us in more just terms sweetens the hour of my death."
Prior to the Golden 20s, gay men were blackmailed by hustlers all the time, in part due to more conservative attitudes, and likely fueled by dire economic conditions. Being blackmailed carried the threat of losing your job, your status in society, your family, and in some cases, everything you had.
And across the continent in 1895, Oscar Wilde was embroiled in his own scandalous trial, which Magnus often referred to in his writings.
There was a provision of the German Penal Code that outlawed, among other acts, sexual relations between men. This legislation is known as Paragraph 175, and in 1897, Hirschfeld founded the Scientific Humanitarian Committee to research and defend the rights of homosexuals, and to repeal Paragraph 175.
Hirschfeld spoke out about the taboo of suicide and presented statistical evidence that homosexuals were more likely to take their own lives than their heterosexual counterparts. And he blamed this fact on these arcane laws.
In 1919, Hirschfeld co-wrote and acted in a short film, Different from the Others, a film created specifically to combat Paragraph 175 and its stigmatizing effect on homosexuals.
The film tells a story about a gay character who is blackmailed by a male prostitute and who decides to come out rather than continue to make blackmail payments. Magnus, playing himself, appears on screen and he says, "The persecution of homosexuals belongs to the same sad chapter of history in which the persecutions of witches and heretics is inscribed. May justice soon prevail over injustice, science conquer superstition, and love achieve victory over hatred." The more liberal atmosphere of the Weimar Republic provided Hirschfeld the opportunity to purchase a villa not far from the Reichstag, where he established his new Institute of Sexual Research. The institute housed his immense archives and library on sexuality, as well as the Museum of Sex, and provided educational services and medical consultations.
Magnus had published literature defining dozens of different identities along the gender and sexuality spectrums, coining the terms transvestite, transsexual, and intersex, among others.
The Institute became a sanctuary for marginalized sexual communities, nestled in the heart of the gay metropolis of Berlin. Hirschfeld lived there with his lover, Karl Giza, and the Institute complex contained a number of rooms which were rented or offered as free accommodations to various noted individuals in and out of the LGBT community, including Christopher Isherwood, W.H. Auden, and Lily Elba, one of the first people to receive gender-affirming surgery, also known as the main character of the film The Danish Girl.
The Institute was one of the few places trans people could be employed, and became a haven for transgender people, where Hirschfeld offered them shelter from abuse, performed surgeries, and gave jobs, albeit of a menial type, mostly as maids.
Meanwhile, clubs like the El Dorado were providing private social spaces for this burgeoning set of identities. Cross-dressing was tolerated in these queer venues, and names like Marlene Dietrich, Josephine Baker, and various drag acts would perform at these music halls. The El Dorado's original sign read, "Hier ist es richtig," or "Here, things are okay." Out there, homosexuality was still illegal, and there was always the threat of police raids, but inside, for a few hours of revelry in the heart of Schöneberg, everything was okay.
Underground spaces existed outside of nightlife too, and sometimes in broad daylight. Tiergarten, Nollendorfplatz, and various train stations and public restrooms became meeting spots for gay men and gender nonconforming folks throughout the entirety of the early 20th century. In the era pre-hookup apps, how else would one find a potential mate? Unfortunately, this deepened the general association of queer identities with hypersexualization and public indecency, a problem we still struggle with today.
And unfortunately, this brief moment of queer experimentation had to come to an end. The Nazis' rise to power led to attacks on the Institute, a mass burning of LGBTQ+ literature, the closing of the El Dorado and similar venues, and crackdowns on criminal persecution of so-called deviants. This caused a community that enjoyed a period of relative visibility to go back underground.
The Nazis interned countless LGBTQ+ folks in camps, branding them with the now infamous pink triangles, and many of those people would remain imprisoned far after the end of the war in 1945. In fact, paragraph 175 wouldn't be repealed in West Germany until 1995.
But despite major setbacks, this is a story of hope and redemption. Even though politicians might try to convince you that queer people are some new threat to decency, we have always existed, and we will always exist.
And no matter what reign of terror comes in, we will persist and we will thrive. We have more rights now than ever before in the US. We may take steps backwards, but we always, in solidarity, move forward.
If you enjoyed yourself or learned something today, consider liking, subscribing, sharing, commenting, all the good things. And if we haven't made you gay, hopefully we made you a little why curious. This has been Curious About Everything, and we will see you next time.